Hi, this video is about the rights commonwealth. It is one third of a threefold commonwealth, along with the cultural commonwealth and an economic commonwealth. There's a economic commonwealth, a rights commonwealth, and a cultural commonwealth. Makes the threefold commonwealth. Three sovereign sectors, three sovereign entities, and they each have their own flag. Their territories overlap with each other completely, and in the previous video, we discussed the cultural commonwealth and what makes up a cultural commonwealth. In this video, we'll talk about what makes up the rights commonwealth. And when we say rights commonwealth, this is the successor of the government. It's it's uh, it's the political governance, the legal governance. That's what we mean by the right state. And in Central European political science, this term, excuse me, is the Rechtsstaat, the rights state. And that's often translated into English or Anglo-Saxon political science as the rule of law or the rule of law state. And those are all basically synonyms for what we're speaking of. You could say the democracy, the democratic state, and that would be true. However, the word democracy has gotten so worn out. I mean, it's automatically associated with Americanism, which means big money, economic lobbyists actually controlling the government through political funding, which is basically legalized bribery. And there is a movement in America for money out of politics. There's been a movement for that for a long time, and it has not succeeded. So the word democracy, it it it's that nowadays. It's commercialized government. So we don't mean that, but if you mean a purified, true democracy, where no moneyed powers, no cultural special interests um, are have their have a say in the government, then yeah, that is a democracy, and that's what we're talking about, a rights commonwealth in Russia specifically, and how to picture that. I'm going to pull up our slideshow. Back up a little bit. Yeah, this is a symbol we snagged from the Free Nations Forum. One of their publications shows this logo or an icon of human beings in a circle as equals. And coincidentally, the Gottlieb Institute, we use the circle as a symbol of the rights commonwealth. And whenever we depict what what a country could look like as a threefold commonwealth, we use a circle for the rights commonwealth. We use a triangle for the cultural commonwealth symbology, and we use a square diamond for the economic commonwealth. So that is that is very fitting there that the Free Nations Forum had this symbol, and we're using it here. Thank you, without permission. So um, without further ado, here's what it makes up a rights commonwealth. And if you watch the previous video, you saw what is not part of it is the cultural initiatives, cultural institutions, including schools and universities, including hospitals, including many other things, libraries, museums. That is not supposed to be. None of that is supposed to be owned by the government. It's not healthy. It is not healthy because the cultural initiatives are where our individual human culture is shaped, our sense of meaning. And that is not the primary purpose of a true government. True government is about equal laws, equal. It's about equality, whereas the cultural sector is about freedom, individual freedom, just liberty in the truest sense of the word. And cultural freedom, we mean religious freedom, philosophical freedom, freedom of world, of your worldview, a worldview, choose your own worldview, your language. That's all part of culture, your ethnic traditions, folk traditions, and so many other things are part of culture. That's not the role of the government to shape that. And it's wherever the government owns and operates cultural enterprises or economic enterprises, it's inherently sick. And but it's so pervasive. It's been so pervasive. I mean, people can hardly see it. Think of the public school system in the United States and in most other countries. Yeah, the public school system was a step forward in the 1800s, 1900s. Yeah, that is a step forward compared to having no schools. That is a step forward. And and the individuals are doing good work. They're making good efforts within these government schools, but systemically or organizationally, it's just not healthy for the government to be owning and operating spaces where children are shaped by their they ought to be shaped according to their family values, their 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 guardians values, and their family's conscience. And that includes language, and includes national and ethnic culture and heritage, or any other philosophy that the parents or guardians want to raise their children in. It could be there's pacifism, Waldorf school, Montessori. That's why there's so many Quaker schools, the Quaker school system, because those parents don't want their children to be raised in a government school, which government school textbooks just present it as fact that, oh, it's just right. It was just nothing could be done, but America, you know, fighting all these world wars, and all these. It's like that's just part of um, government school history. But that, and if a parent wants to raise their children in that culture, then like the national schools, which would be divested from the government, those would focus on American culture. And if that includes American military history culture, that's fine too. That's up to the parents. But that ought not to be compulsory. And that's why Quakers often send their children to Quaker schools. That's why Amish and Mennonites often make their own schools. So, but what is in rightfully part of the government is citizenship. That's the only title for individuals in the right state. There's no right honorable senator. There's no honorable, your honorable judge. There's none of this bowing and scraping. There's no, oh, yes, officer, yes, officer. I'm so sorry, sir. Um, we're not serfs. We're not living in the Middle Ages. And the only title that's legitimate in the rights government is citizen, and we're including police officers. The only title that any police officer should be addressed by is citizen. That's equally respectful to everyone. Police our peace officers do deserve respect, and every citizen deserves respect. So moving on to point 3, yeah, the rights commonwealth includes what Americans call the 3 branches of governance: the legislative, executive, and judicial. Okay. There's 3 branches of rights governance. but all of that is within the rights commonwealth. There's also the cultural commonwealth and the economic commonwealth are not part of the rights commonwealth. They're not part of the legislature. They're not part of the executive. They're not part of the judicial. There's some other branch of society. Okay. So this is really building on the American, the best, the best aspects of the American legacy, such as the three branches of government and the principle of democracy, true democracy, which barely exists in America today. Next is the separation of party and state. Now, America, Westerners, we can see, oh yeah, like look at China or other countries where the party is totally fused with the state, and it is in China. The Chinese Communist Party is parallel completely with the state. Like wherever there's a state office, there's a party officer who has the same like role or like parallel role. It's like a shadow government, and it's actually the party is actually, especially historically, in control of the actual government. So you can see it so clearly in China. But what Americans don't see so clearly, most Americans, is their own fusion of party and state. And uh, here's some examples. The political parties are not part of the government. So why are our government offices, such as the town hall, being used in so-called primary elections? Primary elections are not a government function. They're not even really, they're not government elections. They are internal leadership, they're internal leadership processes of a non-governmental organization, just like like the Moose Club or the Ruritan Club. They all have their own internal leadership processes. Like the Rotary Club elects its president, or various churches select their leadership every year. And that's what these political parties really are. The donkey and the elephant, and any others, they are non-governmental political science clubs, which are not part of the government. So why are actual government facilities being used to host and glorify these entities? In a rights commonwealth, political parties are completely banned from holding functions within a government facility, an actual government facility. If those entities want to rent space from um, non-governmental, um, facilities, like a conference, rent a conference hall from a hotel or whatever, or rent a stadium, or to hold their leadership meetings, so-called primary elections. They're free to do that. They're free to do that, but that's not the place for government facilities. It would just be like um, using the government facilities to host like a church election or um, a Sons of Italy ethnic club election, or like I said, the Moose Club election. That's not what a a true government space is used for. And these entities, these parties, are they're rubbing up against the actual government to rub off some of the glory onto themselves. And it's been going on for so long that people don't even hardly see that these entities are not part of the government. They're in no way part of the government. Furthermore, now that these entities have entwined themselves with the actual government, they have now shaped the government to ensure their perpetual existence, such as by making it so complicated for another party to form, or having to have so many signatures for anyone else to be put on the ballot. This is crazy. This is crazy. Um, let's look at the next point is mandatory 100% public funding of all candidacies. A person who's so-called running for political office, they're basically an applicant for a job, a role in the rights state. And can you imagine if someone was applying for a job as a cashier at a grocery store, or a job as a cashier at a convenience store or fast food restaurant? Imagine if they hired and also, they not hired. They imagine if they sought out thousands of dollars worth of funding from various people in the community, businesses, to go to the employer and run like ads showing how great a applicant they are. And like, it's just crazy. Like, um what are these outside entities doing? Like, um this is would be put to an end completely. It's not freedom. This is not about freedom of speech. It's not about freedom of media. These are applicants for the rights governance, the right state, which is not a business. The government is not a business. And the details are such that this would be um, basically once a person offers themselves as a candidate, basically they're applying for a, a a job in the rights republic. They, from that point on, they would um, all their public appearances and media interviews and so forth would be arranged by the state as a public as public events, like a perpetual sort of town hall um, um, event over the course of, let's say, 30 days to 90 days, maybe 30 days for local elections, 90 days for a federal elections, 60 days for let's say provincial elections. And throughout the time, they are already a candidate, and they should be paid a little stipend by the right state, in a similar way that a person who applies for the army and they're provisionally um, accepted into training, um, they start to receive a stipend already. And so they they can make no media appearances whatsoever without their new employer, potential employer, organizing that. And it sounds so heavy-handed what I'm saying, and this is not wouldn't necessarily be appropriate in a business. So businesses are free to hire people however they want to. But this is not a business. The rights Commonwealth is not a business. And 100% of all interviews during that time, the electioneering time, if once you're an official candidate, 100% of your public appearances would be as a employed worker, um, for the right state, and and all candidates would receive an equal amount of interviews and so forth. I know that there's red flags. I can see people's red flags rising even as I speak. This is not controlling which media outlets can approach, like any media outlet, whether it be a small internet blogger or a big, Reuters, AP News. Um, they're all free to approach the candidates, but it's part of their job as candidates to be, during that electioneering time, like I said, 30 to 90 days, they it's part of their job as trustworthy um, rights workers to for all of their interviews to be coordinated by their employer. Now, if they lose the election, then they're released. They're no longer temporarily employed. It'd be like someone in basic training or in the preliminary weeks which precede um, basic training. It's like them being let go at the beginning, the beginning of basic training or in the initial phases of basic training. Oh, they didn't pass the physical or whatever. Um, but still, during those introductory weeks, they're still employed by the right state. Basically, we're saying that all candidates, once they're official candidate, they are employed by the rights Commonwealth, and their interface with public media is 100% coordinated and funded by the right state, and they all receive equal access to the same events. Yeah, basically the rights government will be um, carting around, bussing around all the candidates and showing them to the people, letting the people interview them. Whether the people through like a direct town hall or through um, you know Zoom meeting or through media interviews. That's still part of the people. So that is actually very radically different. 100% public funding, because this is the public sector, the only public sector. The cultural sector is not quote unquote public. Neither is the economic sector. They're something different than public. And just a side note, in in socialist states like the communist states, everything was public because everything was government. The economy was part of the government. All the schools, all culture was totally part of the government. Everything was a government agency, and it's still like that in the remaining socialist communist states. Um, in a in a it's a an ideal quote unquote libertarian society, which you see something like that in Singapore or Abu Dhabi or Hong Kong, um, although it's not fully that fully libertarian. But the trend there would be for there to be no public sector, and so that everything is privatized. In Singapore, even the police are private, and libertarians think that just privatization is just a magical cure for everything, in the same way that socialists view public nationalization, publicization, if that's a word, governmentalization. Socialists view governmentalization as a magical solution, and they're both magical thinking. The threefold Commonwealth, instead of having a dichotomy of public and private, it has a trichotomy, has a public sector, which is the rights Commonwealth. And that rights Commonwealth doesn't own any economic or cultural enterprises. It has two different private sectors. One is the economic sector, which it's a private sector, and the other is a cultural sector, which is also a private sector. And so, since there's two private sectors, what term do you use for them? I mean, that's why we use the word cultural and economic. You could use other terms. Um, I don't know. Uh, the economic sector, you could say it's the entrepreneurial sector or something like that. But economic is the most basic word. We're going to move on. Another point here. Right. So voting and referendums are part of the right state, and this is totally, all of this can be purified of economic and cultural interests when when these two other sectors are visible, have their own flag, um, their own buildings, meeting halls and so forth at the municipal level and every other level, um, and that each human being in the land and the country is as a member of all three in a certain way, um, then it'll become clear to us, like, oh, that is not right when some economic lobby is influencing or sneaking into or funding the rights government, or some cultural lobby, such as, they say, a fundamentalist, or even a hyper secularist, anti-religious cultural organization is buying the laws. In present day America, that goes on every day. That's just the way it is. Money and politics. And in a threefold commonwealth, it becomes visible, and so we can see it and just stop it. The next point is sortitional service. We're suggesting that totally random selection for at least the lower house of any legislature. If it's a bicameral legislature and there's a so-called upper and lower house, we suggest that the upper house be representative by, according to the constituent areas, um, whereas the lower house would be completely randomly selected among the citizenry. And there's been books about this, sortitional service. Presently, jury duty is sortitional in the United States, um, but this could be expanded. And we're not necessarily proposing that all legislatures be entirely sortitional. Even in a unicameral legislature, half of the seats could be sortitional and half representative. Now, you could have a totally sortitional legislature. Um, we're suggesting a half and half representative, half sortitional, as a step in that direction, and see how it works. It definitely matches the principle of equality, of equalocracy. And it does away with a certain kind of corruption when you can't predict who's going to be in there just by buying them. That's what lobbyists do now, is buy the candidates, and so that the candidates know that they'll keep their nice cushy U.S. government jobs. Um, but when it's totally randomly selected among the entire citizenry every year, you're going to have the lobbyists won't know who to pay ahead of time, and it's going to definitely be representative of the demographics, whether male and female. It's going to probably come out to 50-50 as far as gender, and every other demographic factor. I mean, it doesn't get more equalocratic than that. But the saving grace of this is if this equalocratic, if a sortitional government still owned and operated the schools, and owned and operated the economy, such as you see in socialist states. It's not really a question so much in America, or the economic fusion is more hidden than it was in the socialist states. But this yeah, it becomes transparent. So, oh yeah, what I was going to say is, though, if a sortitional government were to own and operate the schools, then that would not be healthy, because we're not advocating sortitional service in the present day nation state. We're suggesting sortitional service in the context of a of a um, of a threefold commonwealth, where the cultural sector, including the schools and universities, are divested into their own free sovereign sector. And then the right state is the fitting place for sortitional service and other very, very egalitarian principles. So yeah, legal and civic rights are part of the right state, and also civic obligations. You know, in the cultural commonwealth, there there may be no obligations. Obligation is not an inherent part of culture. Um, at, at least legal obligations are not part of culture because it needs to be based on totally free will, totally free whim. Um, that doesn't mean um, there aren't um, self, you know, self taken up obligations. What I mean is, if a person chooses to join a church or or other cultural body that really calls for their service, and so a very active cultural organization. um an individual is free to join that, just as they always have been in America. But that doesn't mean anyone's legally compelled to join any cultural organization. um for another example, let's say Orthodox Jewry. There's some of the Orthodox Jewish um, streams have a fervent practice, and you could also include, like, say, the Amish or the Hutterites um, as examples. And there's many things about those cultures that are, say, not based on egalitarianism. For example, um, gender roles. That's not um, egalitarian in a modern sense. The women wear head coverings, and um, but a threefold commonwealth is at least as culturally free as present day North America. So Amish, Hutterites, Mennonites, Orthodox Jews, and other let's say high, fervent cultural bodies will be free to flourish in this, at least as much as they are today. But I'm giving this example because, however, if an individual chooses to leave the Amish faith or Orthodox Jewish or Hutterite, they are free to do so, right? In present day modern societies, that's just accepted. Yes, there are high demands if you're a member of this group. If you leave, then they're not a member anymore, and there's no so the demands are not coming from the state, they're coming from the individual and their adherence to those cultural practices. And that's totally respected, or even more respected, in the threefold commonwealth. So I only make that point because the rights commonwealth does have obligations, and I was saying that the cultural commonwealth does not have obligations. Because any obligations within the cultural sector are self impelled obligations, you see, not legally compelled obligations. Whereas in the rights commonwealth, there are things that are compelled. I'm sorry to say, but the rights commonwealth is the one place really where there are actual obligations, because it's about equality. And we go so far as to propose that, to the extent that we do need public safety, um, that there ought to be a sort of mandatory civic service for a sort of watch, a neighborhood watch, and things like that. And I know that raises red flags for our progressives, um, but I would say don't worry. It's this. For one thing, when if you'll see our next video about the economic commonwealth, when everyone's needs, basic needs, are really being met, white, black, um, woman, man, children, if everyone's economic needs, food, shelter, transportation, are being amply met, then there's going to be a lot less crime. There's just going to be a lot less degradation and crime. And the any country that takes up the threefold commonwealth is going to very likely have a higher standard of living than Switzerland or Sweden pretty soon, but without falling to statism or corporatism. You know, Switzerland has a very high living standard, and it's ruled by banks and the arms industry. That's not to say there's not a lot of there's a lot of beautiful aspects of Switzerland, um, and there's some sort of seeds of democracy, but it's still a nation state. It still has a fusion of culture and state, like state schools and so forth, government schools. Same with Sweden. Sweden's more statist, not so much ruled by banks, but ruled by the Swedish national government, governmentalism. So, but in a threefold commonwealth, the rights commonwealth, there could and probably should be an egalitarian civic service, and especially, but particularly focused on fields that are part of the right state, such as public safety. Yeah, the details could be worked out, and as far as the military, goodness, separation of a nation state is going to resolve a lot of conflicts, and it's going to show the way for our diplomats to understand how to untangle and deftly navigate all the conflicts that are going on in the world, including the Russian-Ukrainian war, all these conflicts. So the threefold commonwealth, it enables us to be able to perceive where things are tangled up, and not just perceive, but take action to untangle them and actually embody these three different fields of life. And so I'm saying that because, so what about defense? Yes, to the extent that defense and military are still needed, then yes, that is part of the rights government, very much so. And we will be able to even more clearly see where, let's say, arms industry is influencing our rights policy. And so, yes, police and military, to the extent that they're still necessary, that those are very much a part of the rights commonwealth. And we also saying that the threefold commonwealth provides conditions where these can be reduced to a more and more human, peaceable scale, like several of the American founding fathers called for, his no standing army and so forth. Yeah, there's more to it and more details, and I can't go into it all right now. I actually wrote a book about that goes into more of the details. It's called The Idea. It's about making a threefold commonwealth in America. So you can probably find that on Amazon. I'm sure you can find it on Amazon. But we've also made pictures of every other country in the world, what they would look like as a threefold commonwealth. And this particular series of videos, though, is just about Russia and the free nations in a post-Russia, post-nation state Russia, what they would look like as a threefold commonwealth, and how the Free Nations Forum itself and the Free Russia Forum can form a threefold commonwealth in exile, like right now, as a parallel society. We're here to support that. All right. So yes, public safety and military are part of that. Let's get back to a couple other points. The second and third from the bottom of the slide. Yes, the Rights Commonwealth legislates not only laws about just equal rights, but also about cultural rights and economic rights. That's something that is not part of any um, American vision, or that's not part of America uh, presently. Is cultural rights and economic rights, but they need to be, and that's and that's way all. Like I said in an earlier video, anything that is a cultural field such as education, but which needs to be to be um, accessible to all citizens. Um, I could also say medical care. Medical care and education are the two foremost cultural fields as far as being a need rather than a want. These are covered by cultural rights vouchers. They're which can be spent at any service provider, any sort of school, any sort of hospital or doctor, and that's the way it's done through a threefold Commonwealth. Um, Again, you're free to spend over and above that amount, but but these earmarked cultural rights are are funneled through the will of each citizen, and every citizen receives an equal voucher. It doesn't divide humanity into the welfare takers versus the heroic makers. No, even to the rich, these earmarked vouchers, are basically a tax rebate. And I doubt many, even libertarians, probably will not refuse these as long as there's not strings attached. And when you have the three spheres are untangled, then you can see where there are strings and they can be cut. And the economics rights vouchers cover the generic human economic needs. And when we say economic needs, we mean very specifically food, clothing, shelter, and transportation. Those are the four most basic human needs. Shelter includes housing and clothing, perhaps. Um, and this is this seems to be opposed, like the radically opposed to the American way. It's also, if so, it's also radically opposed to the socialist way or the great statist way, because the government will not own any of these economic enterprises. Rather, just as food stamps doesn't mean that the government owns a grocery store, you can spend food stamps at any grocery store. Um, in the same way, these earmarked economic rights vouchers can be spent by any service provider, and those service providers will not be owned or operated or managed by the government. Um, so, in that sense, it's libertarian. It's both social and libertarian at the same time, and it's not just a half a lukewarm. It's not a lukewarm beast. It's not like cutting the baby in half, the proverbial baby. Um, this is a this is an articulate, visible differentiation, like a living organism. It's like a human body. We're not just a blob. Like we have a brain and a nervous system. We have heart and a lungs, a circulatory system, respiratory system. We have a digestive system. We have a kinetic system, if that's the word, where our limbs, and they all interwork, but they are very distinct, differentiated organs. We're not just Our insides aren't just blobs, but every nation state, including the nicest nation states, are blobs. They're undifferentiated blobs, and and they wound humanity. Even Switzerland and Sweden and Finland, these nice nation states, Japan, they're sick blobs. Threefold Commonwealth is differentiated, organic, and alive. So in an previous video, we showed the cultural commonwealth. We suggest use the watersheds as its equivalent to provinces. And, um, and we show here the rights commonwealth with its own flag, and the existing federal subjects are all converted into rights service areas. All this like symbolic stuff about, titular nationalities, or is it a oblast, is it a krai, a territory, is it a autonomous okrug, autonomous district, um, is it an autonomous republic, is it just is it a so all these, this is totally equalized. The rights government is about equalization, and even symbolically, look, and everything, all of these just become RSAs. They're all rights service areas equally. And we even suggest just using the name of the seat, the rights seat, using that as the name of that area, so that you don't start bringing in titular nationalities. Like the Yakutsk RSA, you see it right here, is named after the city of Yakutsk. Instead of having this semi-cultural name, presently it's called like Yakutia parentheses Sakha. Sakha being the name for Yakutia in the Yakut language, the Turkic Yakut language, whereas Yakutia is more of a Latinate, European name, Yakutia. And that's presently the name for that autonomous republic, or this Republic of Russia. But we're proposing that all of this be equalized, even in name, even in symbology. So it'd just be the Yakutsk RSA. And even the flags, the RSA flags, they'd be equalized, constitutionally required to even display an equalized aesthetic with just the symbol of that political unit. So you see, instead of the Chechen Republic of Russia, ethnic republic, it's the Grozny RSA. It's simply named after the seat, the rights seat. Russians are more familiar with this than Westerners, but in Russia, there's the Moscow city, and then there's Moscow Oblast, which surrounds the city, and they're distinct. They're like two different provinces. Like same for St. Petersburg. There's St. Petersburg city, and then there's Leningrad Oblast, which surrounds it, and they're both equivalent to a province. Leningrad just being a previous name for St. Petersburg. But the boundaries, we're suggesting those political boundaries stay the same, but that they be purified as right states. And these are as right service areas. So Moscow City RSA, Moscow Country RSA, Kaliningrad RSA over in the Baltic, St. Petersburg City RSA, St. Petersburg Country RSA. And I took the terminology city versus country, and it's that's used in Switzerland. They have a similar system as far as their cantons, where they have, like, I think it's like Basel City, and they have Basel Country canton, is different cantons. So that aesthetic right there is borrowed from Switzerland, but Switzerland itself would look very much different as a threefold commonwealth. So we're only taking a few seeds here and there. So how does the threefold commonwealth address territorial disputes? And that's, I believe we mentioned in an earlier video, it's the omnicultural bi-state condominium. So every national culture in the world is free to operate there, and both states, both disputants, are recognized as overlapping there. And whichever state presently occupies or actually administers the area becomes a primary political administrator, and the other one becomes the nominal administrator. But they're both shown on the maps, and the nominal political administrator maintains basically a provincial capital in each of the provinces that are occupied. But the seat, these would be symbolic. They'd be basically an office which has the powers of a consulate. And diplomats who are hearing me speak will understand what I'm talking about. Hopefully, other listeners will mostly understand. But the threefold Commonwealth will resolve all of Russia's territorial disputes very clearly, very peaceably, with Ukraine and with Japan, the Kuril Islands. And if there are other disputes, other border disputes, we'll resolve them as well. And the same principles apply to these satellite states, Abkhazia, Pridnestrovia, in other words, Transnistria, South Ossetia, Artsakh. These are all republics that Russia has supported, and they're functionally independent, and most of them are recognized by Russia and Russia's allies. United States and Americans and Westerners have hardly ever heard of them. I myself have been to Pridnestrovia, and I walked the whole land, north, south, east, and west. Thankfully, it's a small country, so it only took a couple of weeks. And I spoke actually with the leadership there about this threefold Commonwealth idea, and they suggested I come back and speak to the University of Tiraspol there. And yeah, Gottlieb Institute would be glad to do that. And we're not pro Russia, we're not pro Transnistria, we're not anti Moldova, we're not anti Ukraine. These principles, we are ready and willing to help apply them to any branch of humanity, any human community that will pick them up and honestly apply them. They're pretty straightforward: separation of nation and state, and furthermore, separation of all cultural fields and the economy from the state to make a threefold Commonwealth. 3 sovereign republics, 3 sovereign commonwealths. The same principles will apply in these frozen conflicts. You can see how we apply that to the Ukraine war, so-called special military operation. We show that in our book called The Gottlieb Initiative. You can find that at our website, www.gottlieb.institute. There's no .com, it's just .institute. And there's a free PDF there. And also a link to our Amazon softcover. So that's it for this video. That's about the rights Commonwealth. The previous video was about the cultural Commonwealth. Our next video will be about the economic Commonwealth. Hope to see you there.